I don't think AGI is coming anytime soon. I do believe in the AI plateau. Gen AI is not a child of God. You're not going to throw it in a hard problem. It's going to figure it out by itself.
It seems to be an Achilles heel of most tools is that quality assurance seems to be not even thought about at all in most cases.
Just tell me what it does for me. Make it hyper personalized, make it a conversation, a segment of one, essentially.
There are benefits of small language models that you just don't find with large language models.
Customer experience is sometimes broken, okay? How do you know if an AI agent is performing correctly? By reducing the degrees of freedom, we were able to get almost every detail perfect around some use cases.
The value of the AI orchestration layer is that that becomes the orchestrator, that becomes the home of the business logic and the rules and the decision making. The following is a conversation with Panos Karagiannis, who is the CEO of Moveo AI. Moveo is a conversational AI automation platform. It's working with companies all over the world, from Brazil to Greece to America. And this conversation is a very interesting conversation. We dive into the role of large language models in an AI automation stack. If any business out there is wondering how do they leverage generative AI for business process automation, then this is a conversation that you'll find incredibly interesting. We also talk about the role of quality assurance, the boring stuff that nobody likes, but the necessary stuff to make production-ready applications, and how Moveo is approaching that and approaching battle-hardening processes and automation functions using AI for businesses. We also talk about how businesses can differentiate in the age of generative AI. If all of the models do the same stuff and all the businesses are using the same models, then how can you differentiate as far as your customer experience is concerned? One of the main parts of differentiation, given that fundamentally most businesses do most of the same stuff and sell very similar products or services, the only real grounds for differentiation is customer experience and brand. But if everyone's using the same models and then everyone starts to provide the same kind of experience, how do you differentiate? And we talk about the difference between, or the tactics around buy versus build when it comes to your AI models. And there's a very interesting suite of recommendations in there as well if you stick around to the back end of the podcast. Without further ado, this is Panos from Moveo AI on VUX World. Panos, welcome to VUX World.
Thank you, Kenny. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. How's things?
Things are good. Things are very busy, but that's probably a very good problem to have.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Definitely. Are you in Greece right now or no?
I'm currently in Greece. I just came back from our office in Sao Paulo, so it's been quite busy for me traveling this beginning of the year.
Nice. And so where do you predominantly operate then, Moveo? Is it global? Is certain hotspots like where's like prime territory for you?
There are certain hotspots. It's basically the markets that we operate on. It's Greece, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and New York in the United States.
Right. Brilliant. A hero of mine, don't know if you know, Juninho. Do you know Juninho?
I don't know Genilio.
Oh, Juninho. He is a footballer, ex-footballer, used to play for Middlesbrough in the 90s. Middlesbrough Football Club in the 90s, I don't know where they got the money from, but they come into some money, and it was the first kind of football club that really made a big effort to bring in loads of like foreign players. So at the time in the Premier League in the 90s, everyone was just like, British players and stuff like that. And so Middlesbrough went and found loads of excellent footballers from Brazil and a few from Italy, brought them all to Teesside, and there was like Emerson, Branco, Juninho, like loads of these like top class World Cup winning players. And they all came to Teesside and set it on fire. It was brilliant.
Now that you mention it, I think it does ring a bell. Isn't this the guy that was very good at taking like free kicks and everybody was amazed by it? Or am I confusing it with...
I think, Branco was an excellent free kick taker. I don't know if you're thinking of Roberto Carlos, but Branco was definitely an excellent free kick taker. Juninho was like 5 foot tall, like tiny fella. But he was super fast, super skillful, and he was my hero when I was growing up. But anyway, he was from Sao Paulo, so there you go. That's my only connection with Sao Paulo. So
That's great.
yeah. So tell us about Moveo then. Yeah, what does it do for those that don't
Well,
know?
basically, exactly. Moveo is a SaaS platform that's designed for enterprises that basically allows enterprises to build their own agents, AI agents, and we specifically focus on financial services and use cases around there. And you can imagine that with Moveo, you can build agents that are reactive in the sense that you can deploy them to reduce operational costs, but at the same time, you can build agents that are proactive. They reach out to your users, trying to encourage them to take specific actions, thus increasing revenue. So that's Moveo in a nutshell.
Nice. And when did you start Moveo?
Moveo started in the heart of COVID, out of my apartment in Boston. So that's 4 years ago, no, 4.5 years ago, more or less. But it's been quite a journey since then. An interesting one, I would say. We've scaled quite fast. We're serving millions of users across like the geographies, and we're a different company than what we start when we started, but we enjoy its phase.
I bet you are. Yeah, you go through sort of chapters, don't you, as you sort of start to scale. So maybe it'd be interesting to figure out. I think there was a Gartner when Gartner used to do the Magic Quadrant for conversational AI. I think they alluded to somewhere in the region of like 2,000 technology companies that provide this kind of capability. And the conversational AI capabilities list or whatever it is, I think it has something like 148 different kind of companies on it, kind of that all provide conversational AI capabilities. And so when you began in 2020, obviously in 2020, if that's during COVID, there was quite a lot of platforms already available. What led you to want to start something yourself? Like what was lacking in the market that led you to want to do this yourself?
Well, back then, I was working for one of the big tech companies that was probably in that quadrant that you mentioned. And what we saw really as a gap is that most of them catered to big enterprises, like the JetBlues of this world, and that state of the art kind of technology was available for big enterprises like these. Whereas what we try to do is essentially productize those algorithms so that we can effectively scale them into smaller accounts and more companies can have access to it. And you don't have to be, let's say, $1 billion company to actually see value in return on investment. And you don't need a huge investment to do that. Plus, what we realized that was, very much early on what is now called Gen AI. Those algorithms back then, it was like coding a human, all right? It was transactional chatbots that you had to really think beforehand for every single scenario. Therefore, the maintenance cost was very big. What we figured out is that, hey, we can apply some of what is now called Gen AI technologies to make this easier, more user friendly. So that was basically how this started. Since then, we made huge leaps, but that's the backstory.
Nice. So correct me if I'm wrong then. So your opportunity you saw was to focus more on that kind of mid-market, which is the companies who perhaps are not going to have, sophisticated teams, big levels of skill in terms of their AI capabilities and stuff like that. And the goal is to try and make adoption easier by trying to almost templatize or productize certain use cases for specific industries. Is that correct?
Exactly. And by reducing the degrees of freedom, we were able to get almost every detail perfect around some use cases. And that was basically the key for us, allowing people that do not know how to code, that do not have experience building agents, actually be able to deploy something within a few weeks, for example, in production.
Nice. And how then is it that you're leveraging generative AI, as you mentioned? Because there's kind of two schools of thought, I suppose, in this sort of space. Is that in 2020, most of the platforms at the time were using NLU plus kind of like if this else sort of like rule-based logic for business logic. I think business logic wise, that still seems to be the thing to do, although there is a move towards people considering how large language models can play a role on the logic level. But it'd be interesting to figure out, a lot of the other platforms have started to sort of settle on where generative AI is valuable and where it's not. So how are you thinking about incorporating Gen AI into Moveo and the kind of capabilities that it gives you? How are you leveraging it?
Right. So basically, Moveo uses Gen AI across the board. And as you mentioned, Kane, when you build an agent, there is an aspect to it that it's about processes and workflows. And you can definitely put some Gen AI into that aspect, even though you don't really have to. And then there is this other aspect of how that agent can use unstructured knowledge, follow guidelines, and so forth to achieve a certain goal. Mobile blends the two worlds. And there's this common misconception that agent platforms, they're using an LLM, but they're using a single LLM, right? Which is couldn't be further from the truth, especially for enterprise use cases. So we have an orchestration platform, which we call agent, that uses many LLMs and basically blends those two different tasks, the business logic plus what we call unstructured document, or you can even provide your sales scripting there. You can provide everything that the agent needs to know about your business. And those two things get blended into quite complex pipeline of steps. From the moment someone asks a question and that question gets contextualized, and the right tool is picked by an LLM that orchestrates that action all the way down to synthesizing the response and actually responding to the end user. And the toughest thing is actually doing this fast.
Mm, mm,
So,
yeah, yeah. Um, okay, so you're leveraging generative AI. It sounds as though when you're talking about abstracting knowledge and stuff like that, I'm assuming that there's a retrieval augmented generation based capability in there. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to
yes.
there, yeah?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. We built our own pipeline years ago. We're still using it and keep improving it.
Nice. And so that's the knowledge side. On the process side, are you still leveraging? You mentioned there large language models, choosing the appropriate tools and stuff like that. Are you also leveraging generative AI at that sort of level on the process level?
Yes, and it's actually getting deeper and deeper in the process level as well. Because if you do not do that, you're essentially asking your users to write pseudocode. Okay, let's be like, if you have used a platform like that, you have to know about context variables, you have to know about complex stuff, like the memory of the chatbot and things like these. Whereas if you allow some Gen AI to be present in the business logic, you can abstract away a lot of that complexity. And that's what we aim to do. And we put LLMs much deeper in the workflow business logic section of the chat.
Mm. And how does that kind of come together then? Is it that you use large language models for example, the example you gave there in terms of like context variables and stuff like that? That's essentially like entity extraction, and then it'll be saved somewhere, and then that variable will be used later on. You're using large language models for that. Is that correct?
We're using that. Oh, yeah, that's one application. So you can, to be more specific, right? If someone wants to ask the end user's first and last name, that's an entity, as you mentioned, right? And
Hmm.
or using LLMs to recognize that something is a name. Just take my name, okay? It's Panos. It's not a very common entity, right? Someone would have to really manually put it there. Otherwise, the previous chatbots always confuse my name and I have to capitalize it and be very careful with how I do it. But LLMs are actually able to do that very well, validate it and normalize it. But we don't limit ourselves at that. That's a very good use case. The next application that we see a lot of value from LLMs into the workflows is, I would say, on how you can do custom, let's say, conditions. So you can branch out and say, if the user is angry, if the user is happy, if the user is a VIP member or whatever, before you would have to kind of like a pseudocode. You have operators, and it's hashtag variable is equal to BIP. But you can, humans, and especially our users, are not coders. They
Mm.
haven't done that before. They know logic. Everybody kind of can follow a mirror board. So try to replicate the experience there.
Mm.
And there are caveats. We can go into the details as well, but there are caveats on the authoring experience. And language is ambiguous. That's one problem. So people do make mistakes when typing that type of stuff and inconsistencies.
Yeah. I suppose that's that's a challenge. So okay, so that's some of the I suppose um a level of business logic that is dependent on the sort of like the type of customer, if you like. And so that type of logic is essentially written in a prompt, and you're giving that prompt to the model, and you're saying at some point in time, if this customer is a VIP, do this. If that customer is not a VIP, do the other. Is that right?
It's a little simplified. There are a lot more things going on, like what is the starting point of where that, logic gets executed, and a few more things like that. But broad strokes, yes.
Yeah.
The LLM can decide on a particular, let's say, flow, but it's not only LLMs. We do have deterministic methods as well to check if what the LLM is outputting actually makes sense.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. What I'm trying to sort of get to is kind of like we've been spending a lot of time so far this year really trying to get to the bottom of where LLMs are being leveraged with great success for businesses, and most businesses that are leveraging a platform like Moveo obviously need to use what the platform provides. So it's interesting to figure out what the platforms and how they vary, and how they're kind of approaching this kind of stuff, because my sort of notion over the last kind of like since we've started exploring this on the podcast a bit more is that large language models tend to provide a very good role in the space of knowledge search, which is the RAG approach. They tend to play a really good role in terms of kind of like, I suppose, classification, for want of a better phrase. And so,
Right.
you've got the RAG, but you've also got like what is this user trying to actually do?
Right.
Um, and then once you know that, they also play a good role in terms of language generation. So both in terms of like the creating summaries of content that's being extracted and such forth. And then also even in scenarios where, for example, you might not have the content or something's not quite in scope for the chatbot, and therefore you can kind
Right.
of contextually respond and say, I'm sorry, but this thing you've just referenced and reference it isn't something that I can do. So it seems to be really good at providing contextual responses, summarizing answers, understanding language, dealing with questions. The area where I'm yet to be convinced is in the business logic layer. And so I'm just curious about how you approach that. I know you mentioned you've got deterministic methods as well, but I'm
Yes.
curious about exploring the ways in which you're using large language models at the logic layer, and how you essentially basically make sure it's doing the things that it should do.
Yes. Yes.
And all,
Yes.
and how do you decide when to use a model for logic versus when you should use deterministic methods and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah. This is. I think I'm on your corner on this, Kate. I don't believe language models are very good at following processes precisely, especially when the stakes are high. Stakes are high. I mean, it's an enterprise environment, let's say. And it gets even more tricky when you are asking the LLM to take actions for you. So let's say you're asking it to cancel your withdrawal or whatever action you're trying to make, and then it has to call an API. And what some people are trying to do in that space, which is not us, is function calling and stuff like that, which it works for cool demos. From our experience, I wouldn't, I wouldn't deploy that in production right now. Maybe when GPT 5 or 6 come out, maybe who knows, but not for now. So the approach we've taken is kind of trying blending those two worlds a little bit. So we keep the determinism. We like determinism. We like seeing a tree for some things. Okay. We do have collection. We call them like abstract documents and stuff, but not everything is a document in life, right? You just need to describe the process sometimes, which can be as simple as ask someone's first and last name, of their credit card type, and send an email to, or sign them up for HubSpot if they're interested in scheduling a demo. Like that type of stuff is not really a document. That type of stuff we prefer to, and we provide the UI to draw it, process a tree almost like you can read it from top to bottom. We just add LLMs on those places where it is very hard to have determinism. It's not, when we're having determinism doesn't generalize very well, like asking someone's name or taking a condition and branching from left to right. And we're sure about that. And even when we do so, we have our, a lot of steps in like chains that involve even deterministic steps to make sure that the LLM doesn't hallucinate. We don't let the LLM change the inputs to like you said, API calls and stuff like that. We love determinism for some stuff, and that's where we see agent delivering value.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Sorry, go on.
no, another thing I was gonna say is that more like an observation. We see the return on investment mostly right now from what is called Gen AI through agents because precisely they can do end-to-end processing, and it's not going to be a glorified, let's say, chatbot that answers from an FAQ page that Google can I can Google. I will Google stuff. Every user, the average user, will first Google stuff. The problem happens when there's action that needs to be taken and when personalization comes into play. And we're very good at both. I have a problem for myself. All right. Now you tell me what I'm doing wrong because you can check my transaction history. Otherwise, it still delivers value for some cases under certain conditions. Don't get me wrong, but where we see the real return on investment is those two: hyper personalization, taking actions, maybe scalability would be it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So it sounds as though what you're saying is that you are leveraging large language models mostly on the logic layer for dialogue management, not necessarily for business process execution.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. Brilliant. All right, that makes sense. One of the things I'm curious about, and I haven't seen this in any platform yet, is the concept of quality assurance. Now, it's a boring topic for those people who I just want to just get building and writing prompts and doing fancy stuff. But my dad always says that, and I concur with this. He's a keen golfer, and he always says it's dry. I don't know if you play golf. Do you play golf?
I haven't, and it's probably a big omission.
From Greece, all the lovely weather over there. You don't play golf.
There's only one golf course in all of Athens, and while I was in the US, I didn't get a chance to play golf.
Yeah. Anyway, so the and I've said this a few times before. The notion is it's driving for sure, putting for door. So for those who are not following golf, whenever you take your first shot on a hole, if it's a long hole, you'll use a driver and you'll hit the ball off the tee. And for people like Tiger Woods, who hits the ball a mile, and Rory McIlroy, etc., they hit the ball so far and it looks really cool and it's really nice and flashy to be able to whack the ball so far, like Happy Gilmore or whatever. But what actually matters is when you get on the green, you've got to put the ball in the hole. And if it takes you 3 shots to put the ball in the hole, it doesn't really matter how far your drive goes because you're still taking 3 more shots to get the ball in the hole. Whereas if you can put, and you can put the ball in the hole in 1 shot, 2 shots max when you're on the green, that's what wins your competitions. So it's driving for show and putting for door. Putting is where you make the money, basically. Which is to say that the boring stuff, the putting, is where the important stuff happens. And I think quality assurance is like that. The fancy stuff is the conversation design, the RAG stuff, and the dynamic kind of dialogue management and stuff like that. But what really matters is that it's doing that thing that it should do every single time at scale. And the only way you can find that out is to have some kind of tools that automate the testing of that, because it's a probabilistic technology which means you can't hope to simulate
Yeah.
enough conversations yourself to be able to test it and guarantee consistency. And the tools I've seen thus far, and we've been looking at a lot of them over the last sort of 12 months, it seems to be an Achilles heel of most tools is that quality assurance seems to be not even thought about at all in most cases. I'm wondering whether that's something that you've given any consideration to and have any thoughts on.
Well, we have, in a sense, and I would say we are trying to tackle the problem. We're trying to tackle two problems at the same time, which I think are related. Um, the problem with right now with Gen AI is that, as you say, is not very deterministic. So you can run multiple runs of the same, let's say, or similar output, and you're gonna get different results. Now, in the previous generation of chatbots, you didn't have this problem. It was mostly deterministic, and you can measure things like, did the chatbot understand correctly? And you had probabilities, and then probabilities allow you to build dashboards that measure the performance, right? And then you can say, oh, it's 80% coverage, or the coverage meaning it's 80% of the times the bot understood correctly because I know the probability thresholds, and depending on how strict I want to be, I can graph these things. Now, how do you know if an AI agent is performing correctly? Either as you're building it or after you've deployed it, because we're talking about thousands of conversations a day, okay? Like the scale is big. If you're supposed to hire another team just to look at the chat logs, then you're probably losing all the return on investment. So what we did is actually we have adopted some automated metrics. So we have a more powerful LLM engine. I'm saying more powerful LLM engine because this is not part of our message path or our critical path that runs in sub-second time. It takes its time, okay? And that's okay because it runs on the background, and it can analyze all those conversations, like from the sentiment. And we have like 6 or 7 key metrics that we're tracking. Uh, and ultimately, is the ticket resolved? Is the conversation resolved or not? And we kind of try and generate an AI CSAT as well. So doing that allows us to, have some peace of mind when we have made changes and we deploy them. That okay, the scores we're getting live in production right now are good. Okay, we have an AI CSAT of, let's say, 4 out of 5, and typically we get a 3 out of 5, so we're improving, or vice versa. What we are adding right now is the ability to also run those kind of automated tests, again, through an LLM, but you have a big enough sample, you can kind of get within statistical error quite good. You can run those tests on past dialogues as well and rerun them and see, okay, I have the way we think about this stuff is we have a draft state while you're building your AI agent. You're kind of playing with it. Now it's time to publish, right? Well, that's the experience within the platform. That's the lingo we use. So before you publish, you will be able to now say, okay, run those tests for me. Let me just see, am I going to screw things up or not? And it's I'm describing this now, and it sounds easy and cool, but trust me, okay, it's kind of tough, especially when you have to take snapshots of personalized information because the world changes. Okay, a conversation that happened a week ago about user Panos with this user ID is the world has changed since a week ago. So now my transactions look completely different than what it used to look on that timestamp. So we have come up with quite a resourceful set of things to be able to do some stuff like that.
Yeah, that's good. So you're looking at things like automation score in terms of was it
Yeah,
successfully automated? You're looking at
yeah.
things like, an automated CSAT, things like that. Like what are some of the other things that you think are important in terms of, measuring the efficacy of these systems?
Well, you know, AI CSAT or AI assist, as we call it, those are scores, right? This is the end result, but they comprise out of 5 or 6 or 7 different metrics, like, number of times that the bot repeated itself when it got cornered, the sentiment, uh, disambiguating on ambiguous input and not giving you the huge laundry list that sometimes GPT gives you, right? When you say it doesn't work and you see this huge answer, things that might be going on, when a human would just say, what exactly doesn't work? Just give me some more data, man, disambiguate.
Mm.
So these are like, I make it look like, there's just one score universally, but ultimately those scores get computed from those softer qualitative attributes.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Like agent escalation and stuff like that, I imagine probably.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
true.
Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds good. So what are you kind of like, you've kind of started in 2020, you've kind of, got to where you are, the platform is leveraging generative AI, you're getting clients and all that kind of stuff. Things are going well. What do you think is the kind of like, I suppose the barrier to growth for conversational AI? Because in 2022 when ChatGPT came around, everyone all of a sudden got crazy about it. Every exec in the world's like, we need our own version of ChatGPT. Finally, after years and years and years of knocking on the door. But it seems, and every company, lots of companies are investigating it. But when you look at the data, there still seems to be a problem for most organizations identifying the right use cases and getting out of proof of concept. So,
Yes.
what do you see as being the barriers here for businesses today?
Look, I would say, how ready are those organizations to, let's say, adopt Gen AI? Because Gen AI is not a child of God. Okay. You're not gonna throw it in a hard problem. It's gonna figure it out by itself. Gen AI works well, proportionally well, I would say, with the kind of data it has access to. So we've worked with many organizations that they want to, let's say, automate a process. And then when you ask about where this data lives right now, it's in someone's notebook, right? Or I'm being extreme here, but you understand that this data is not accessible through, let's say, an API or some sort of system. So that's really preventing people, I would say, from deploying to production, along with another very big sensitive issue, which is privacy. So where's my data? Like regulation wise, what is the life cycle of this data? We've seen this a lot in financial services. Maybe that applies less so in other industries, but financial services, we have had to, let's say, deploy in private clouds. We use our own LLMs. Our own LLMs, meaning we don't do foundation models, but we do post-train open source ones. And because that's where we see the real value of agents. And privacy is another big concern, I would say, King.
Mm,
People trying to understand how dangerous is this? Is this really gonna not leak my data? It- I would say these are the two biggest ones on the top of my head that's really preventing people from adopting it. Um, and it's a paradigm shift sometimes. Okay, the third one I would say is that we talk with many organizations, and sometimes we push for what is the future, what we believe is the future, and uh, turning, for example, one-way notifications into conversations. It's a very powerful idea, right? Why on earth would I get an email like the typical batch and blast marketing approach with all the little things that your tool does? Just tell me what it does for me. Like make it hyper personalized, make it a conversation, a segment of one, essentially. Like what I'm telling you now, pitching this to customers, and, it is going very well, but it's a new idea. It's a paradigm shift. You've, you're a marketing person in a company XYZ, and you've used all your life for the past 20 years, you're used to sending emails. You're used to sending SMS messages that are, that long and detailing every little thing your tool does. If I tell you that you can essentially turn each one of those messages to a conversation, like for you, like with all your preferences, hyper personalized, that's a paradigm shift. And naturally, there is some pushback. Does it really work? And people are trying it out right now. It's going to take some time. But to be honest with you, I'm optimistic because all these previous years, starting from 2020, there was no really the possibility of applying Gen AI to enterprise use cases without, agents. You would see hallucinations. You would see problems like I mentioned before. Now is the time that we can actually do it.
Very nice. Very nice. That's great. So you mentioned there that you use a bunch of kind of open source models, presumably fine-tuned models. Are they fine-tuned?
Yeah, we do fine tune them, we have a lot of different, let's say, what we call LoRa adapters. Okay, different, let's say, heads on top of that LLM, because we have many different calls that we do to the same LLM.
Right. And so what would be an example of, a use case that you've needed to, customize an LLM for?
Oh, synthesizing a response might sound like, ChatGPT does this for me every time I log into that beautiful UI. But in our case, when we're talking agents, you have to synthesize a response given condition on a lot of documents, on a lot of, let's say, live information, um, on guidelines on what's allowed or not allowed. So if you take the vanilla LLM and you try and do something like that, you're gonna get to 60%, maybe 70% of where you actually want to be. But we're aiming for enterprise, right? So we're like by fine tuning, we can go up until 95% of where we actually want to be and make no mistakes. Uh, so this is one of the use cases that LLMs are not naturally trained to do. Are not First of all, you're not naturally trained to do to say I do not know. Okay, we're training this guy to say if it's true, like if it doesn't exist, just give up, man. Like don't come up with stuff.
Very eager to please, aren't they? Well, that's
Right,
always on.
exactly.
Yeah. So that's a good example of that. So you have a specific model that once content has been retrieved, you've got one model in particular that has been fine-tuned specifically to then create summaries based on that content. Is that correct?
Yeah. Can you explain this again, Kane? Like I'm not sure.
So when you were talking about the use case for this specific kind of like customized or fine-tuned model, you said it was for creating summaries. So am I correct in understanding that it's once you've done the retrieval and you've brought back a few chunks from a few different documents and you've got all that together, you have a customized model that is responsible for creating the summary off the back of that, and that's all it does. Is that correct?
Actually, it's not exactly a summary. That's what threw me off. It's basically replying to the user questions given those documents. Like let's
Right.
say you ask, "How can I sign up?" And then we have, at a very simplistic example, we have 10 documents, and we know everything about you from HubSpot, for example. And then condition on that, we reply, "What is the process of signing up?"
I'm with you. Okay. Okay. And so that model has been tuned basically on what is it that you're trying to customize that for? Then is it the natural language dialogue component? Is it the
Yes.
tone? Like, yeah.
Yes, exactly. This has been trained on, like, say, millions and millions of proprietary data, uh, so that this actually behaves in, uh, as good as possible in terms of customer experience. And what does this mean? We have probably seven or eight dimensions that we are really, really monitoring, like hallucinations, repetitions, disambiguations, markdown, like how beautiful the answer is. So we're teaching it to behave very well on metrics that we backward engineered from customer experience, basically, because that's what we want to do. That's our use case.
Right. I'm with you. And so presumably in those examples, you've got different models that do those things in terms of monitoring hallucinations and this, that, and the other. Is that kind of where you get this kind of concoction of models from? Is that every one of those 6 items that you care about has got a different model looking after it? You've probably got one model that's doing your vectorizing and all that kind of stuff. Like, is that how you're approaching it? You're approaching it from any specific job that needs to be done within the platform. There's going to be a specific model that's only there to do that job.
Yes, we do that. Sometimes we find that we have to merge certain metrics into one. Let's say LLM because conceptually that makes sense. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet, and I cannot tell you every single thing. It's a new LLM. No, but we do run experiments, and um, eh, in general, the idea is correct.
Hmm. So one of the things that I can't remember, I think it might have been can't remember who I asked this to anyway. Someone who'd been on the podcast recently. It was either Ron Ashry or Alan Nickel, which was about as models get more impressive and better, which in theory they may do. Kind of like at the moment, and I'm absolutely with you that for certain things, you're probably going to find that a fine-tuned small language model is going to be much better at, for example, entity extraction in financial services.
Yeah.
And that fine-tuned small language model is going to be different to a fine-tuned language model that is customized for extracting entities in retail, because it's different business, different industries, different product types, etc. So I can understand, and I agree that I reckon that's where the area of focus for many companies is going to be, is like small models fine-tuned to do very narrow tasks, very specific jobs, and then you can concoct and build and merge those together to create use cases. One might be really great at summarizing responses. The other one might be really great at entity extraction. Another one might be really good at finding hallucinations or whatever. The question I sort of have, and somebody asked me this when I gave a talk last year, and I was kind of, banging on about really enthusiastically about kind of like customized small language models and fine-tuned small language models. And the question I got asked was a really good one, which is, as models get more impressive and bigger models get better, the goal of those bigger models is really for them to be able to generalize across all kinds of areas and basically do everything. Yeah. And the goal of the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic, etc., is to create artificial general intelligence. And if that's the case, then these models should be able to generalize across everything. Therefore, they should in time be able to kind of do everything as well. So do you sort of envisage a world where, as the large foundation models get better and better and better and better and better, they kind of consume all of the things that small language models fine-tuned are doing today? Or do you think there'll always be a place for the small language model kind of market, if you want to call it that?
Well, Kane, I wish you were in our management meetings, because that's coming up every single time and it's a very good question. Like, what do you expect are you going to get from free by, let's say, all these big players, OpenAI and Anthropic, Meta, releasing more powerful models? And what do you actually fine tune and you specialize on, because nobody's going to be able to do in the future? Well, nobody has the crystal ball, but I'll tell you my view on the topic. I don't think AGI is coming anytime soon. And I do believe in the AI plateau. People are talking about it. And unless there's a huge breakthrough right now, and I very well be, and I'll be wrong, that people are very good at training with video or images, and then new source of data. Basically, the data is running out. Okay, and if you look at every significant leap from, let's say, GPT-2 to GPT-3, GPT-3 to GPT-4, there is about 10x more data. Now, we've already used 15 trillion tokens for English. That's actually good quality. Maybe there is 100 trillion tokens out there, so maybe you have just enough to get GPT-5 out. But I don't think the future of AGI is through that architecture. I actually, having studied that, it's my personal belief that it's not going to happen. Therefore, for all practical intents and purposes, because we are running a company, we have to make this work. And if this is the future that's going to be like for the next 3, 4, 5 years, that's where we're betting all our money. That AGI is not going to come in, and OpenAI is not going to steamroll us, because we are investing on specific use cases, and then suddenly everybody is going to have that outside the box. And that's, I guess, a risk that someone has to decide for themselves. But I think it's an educated one, and we'll see.
Definitely, it's really interesting now. Yeah, I've read a lot about how there's a lot of people out there who really just don't believe that the architecture that large language models are built on is anywhere near close to being the kind of architecture that will lead to any kind of AGI, Jan LeCun and Gary Marcus and all
Oh
this lot.
yeah, I'm on their camp exactly. I'm on LeCun's camp, I would say.
Yeah. It's not a bad camp to be on. And I think that, my response to that question at the time was that there are benefits of small language models that you just don't find with large language models. Like large language models are, first of all, a lot slower. So the inference time is a lot larger. And so if you want to do something like put a use case into the voice channel, you really don't want to have large language models all over the place because the inference is just going to be too long. The conversation is going to be so clunky. The other thing is that although large language models are, very capable and may well perform very well at something like entity extraction or summarization, do you need the might and the cost of those models to do something that really is almost a trivial task at this point? I'm not saying I don't want to boil entity extraction down to a trivial task because it's not. But what I'm saying is that technology has moved on so much that you could easily believe that it's a trivial task now. And so if you have a small language model that's fine-tuned, that's operating a lot faster, that's far cheaper, that you could control and secure because you can run it on your own servers and stuff like that. And also you can then freeze it in time, which means for a bank, you work a lot with financial services. Yes, the needs of customers change. Yes, the type of dialogue that they use changes. Maybe that model needs to be iterated on over time, but it's not going to change so drastically that it's going to require ripping up and throwing out every 6 weeks. And when you look at some of the big models and they've got things like catastrophic forgetting, there's all kinds of stuff where a new model comes out and all your prompts don't work anymore. And it's like, there seems to me to be so many benefits of fine-tuned small language models that even if large language models do have the kind of architecture that leads to AGI, whatever that AGI is, are you telling me that inference is going to be a lot quicker and that, it's going to be far better? So yeah, I'm with you. I don't see it.
I agree, and you're bringing like very good points. Like cost is one of the big determining factors. So whether someone is going to adopt Gen AI or not, GPU cost is through the roof right now. So that's a very good argument. Like, why would someone want to use a hammer to do something so trivial as whatever? I agree with you.
Mm. What are your thoughts on um, the two ways in which a business can go? Is that, for example, let's say that I'm a bank and I want to have all of the capabilities that I need to be able to deliver the kind of services in a conversation that perhaps Moveo can help me do.
Okay.
One of that is, understanding customer intent. We've mentioned entity extraction. We've mentioned summarization. There's a whole bunch of use cases and capabilities that we need these models to perform. If I was running the teams within those organizations, the question and debate that I would be having with myself is, do we invest our time to create our own fine-tuned small language model for entity extraction, for argument's sake? Or do we leave it to a company like Moveo who can perhaps do it and then generalize it across the financial sector and then we don't have to worry about it? Do you think there's value for businesses in having their own models for certain use cases? Or do you think that that is not going to be required because companies like Moveo are going to be able to provide the same capabilities in the platforms?
Well, that's the classic debate of build versus buy, right? That exists for a long time, and it definitely applies to LLMs, and we have seen that. Generally speaking, I would say that a company like Moveo or a platform like Moveo doesn't simply have an LLM. Like the LLM or the LLM that you're describing is just, let's say, one of the pieces of the whole platform. It's like you're designing a car, and the engine is one of the 10 things the car does. Like, but how do you create those virtual agents? Like, how do you change prompting without having to call the data scientist? How do you monitor that? How do you version that? How do you deploy it on all your channels? There's like a whole ecosystem of things that someone needs to do in order to be able to successfully deploy something in production from the simplest of stuff. So there is value in building specialized LLMs. Let's say you are a bank and you have that specific need that you only have the data for, and you want to train your LLM, it's probably going to be 5-10% better than what Moveo can do for you, because we can only go to a certain point on how deep we can specialize. And for that reason, we allow customers to bring their own LLMs if they have to. We're using their, let's say, sort of APIs to apply to end users. But what you're getting with a platform like Moveo is not just the LLM, is what I'm trying to say. It's that whole platform approach of how you build, version, deploy, and monitor agents in production, which is far beyond than LLMs.
Oh yeah, of course, of course. The whole orchestration layer is where the value is. To be totally
Yes.
honest, and also over time, and I haven't seen any kind of AI vendor adopt this position yet, because I don't actually think it's perhaps dawned on them, which is that over time, right? Let's think about what businesses do. Right, every business has a series of systems. Those systems perform certain functions, and they're used by certain types of people. And the legacy systems that most businesses have in place at the moment are only there because they do certain things. They have certain logic or certain calculations or certain capabilities that they have that are unique to the business, perhaps, part of the business's IP or whatever. Over time, in order to make AI work for a business, you are going to have to extract away from those line of business systems the logic required and centralize it somewhere, because one process might touch 6 different systems, and therefore the value of the systems that you have right now, they're in silos doing their own little things, which is why most businesses are hamstrung in automating things, because they can't connect them together. Whereas the value of the AI orchestration layer is that becomes the orchestrator, that becomes the home of the business logic and the rules and the decision making. And you just use the business systems that you have for the unique specific things that you can't do without. So for me, businesses ought to be considering what they do with that orchestration layer, because fundamentally that's going to become the brain of the business, the whole business in future. And I think that's fair enough to say, well, we need a platform to do that, like a Moveo or someone similar.
Right.
What I was kind of getting at prior to that was that within that orchestration layer, there is going to be some things. Well, it's a question, I suppose. Are there going to be some things that you require of that orchestration layer that you can probably do better as a business than a vendor like Moveo? And an example of that, I think, is something like the way that we've been advising clients for a long time, and this is, I still think, where a lot of businesses need to get to, is that the first touch point for your business across every single channel is going to be mediated by AI. I don't think there's any question about that. So if I come in on a chat, or if I come in on a phone you, or if I send you an email, or if I go to your website, whatever I do, go to your app, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to hit some kind of AI, call it an agent, call it whatever it is. And the job of that AI is to understand what I need, and first and foremost, to then determine how best to solve that problem. Because for some things, maybe actually this is a fraud use case. It's very high emotion, very high risk. You've got to call someone. We've got to put you through to someone. For some things, we might have a self-service journey in the app that works really, really well, and there's no point in using a chatbot for this because it works better if you just follow this link. Other things, like you've got a question or there's a use case that actually is better being resolved in conversation, then I'll do it for you right now. And so in order to do that, you have to have a kind of ultimately the ultimate classifier, if you like. So every touch point for your business is going to have to hit this model, and that model is going to be the thing that says, right, okay, Panos means this, and the best way to do that is to go here. And for me, that's an area where I think businesses can really differentiate, because the business is the one that's having all these conversations with customers. They've got all that conversational data to fine tune and train that model. And the most critical part, the first most critical part of getting any automation right from a conversational perspective is understanding, isn't it?
That is
So
true.
for me, that seems to be where there's a huge opportunity for businesses to differentiate. And if a platform like Moveo can say, right, well, I don't care if you bring your model, or if you want to use our model, we've got the orchestration layer, bring the model that you want or use ours. I think that's the recipe for some real success there, where you allow businesses to differentiate and create some really valuable IP. And then you put together the platform that allows them to orchestrate experiences across channels and across use cases.
That is very valid. And at the version of that, we have started to actually see from our existing customers, they've been asking us for something like that because right now, customer experience is sometimes kind of broken, okay? Because you have a chat at the bottom right of the page, you have a search bar at the top there of the application, and then you can search about it, and it's probably Elasticsearch or something that retrieves articles. And then you have another chatbot on the help center that does maybe different stuff from the logged in chatbot. How do you unify that in one chat experience and you route to the correct kind of process is invaluable, in my opinion. So it's not going under a radar cane, and I think I personally think is a very valuable recommendation, and it's good to validate with you as well here on this podcast that you're hearing from a lot of different sources.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. That's really good. That's really good. So we're coming up on time. So maybe we can finish up with maybe some, you know, what would your advice be? We mentioned earlier on about some of the challenges that a business might be facing if they want to try and get this stuff off the ground, data privacy, having the data house in order and things like that. What's your kind of advice for those businesses that either A, are interested in beginning their journey to try and leverage some of these tools to make an impact, or B, maybe they've got some legacy type of solution in play, like a NLU or rule-based chatbot of something like that, and they want to try and leverage some of these new capabilities? Like, what's your sort of advice for either starting or migrating into, a platform like Moveo and the world and the capabilities that generative AI offers?
Right. So I would probably tell them that they need to assess their, quote unquote AI readiness. Like, can data actually be retrieved from the legacy systems? And are there processes in place to do so? I would also advise them that, AI or Gen AI is not a child of God, so it's not going to work automatically. And they need to have a proper team in place. Not a huge team, but a process of someone that's owning a project and trying to improve, let's say, kind of the chatbot, monitor it, come up with new ideas of where to get data and things like that. And ultimately, I would also tell them that starting out is not so scary. Sometimes, you can just start with what we do with a lot of clients is sort of like A/B testing. So if you have your existing chatbot and you're afraid of breaking a lot of stuff, you can only route, let's say, 5% of your traffic to the new chatbot and kind of A/B test them in parallel. Transferring to the new chatbot, to let's say Gen AI chatbot, you're sitting, if you have a transactional type of bot, you are sitting on a gold mine of data. So you can, when Moveo offers some of these capabilities as well, like we can ingest some of the past chat logs and come up with new knowledge articles, as we call them, or like are good candidates for your Gen AI chat. So it's a process. It's an iterative process, and it's not going to happen magically. And I think it's an ongoing process as well because this thing keeps on improving, keeps on living with you. So it's like a living organism within the company.
Nice. Agreed. Couldn't agree more. It's like bringing on a new employee, isn't it? And I'm starting to actually call them digital workers more than anything else because, they're using a combination of AI plus they're using technology and they actually are performing the jobs of people in some
Right.
sort of sense. So it's almost like you're bringing on a new member of staff and you wouldn't kind of like, you wouldn't be quite so irresponsible if it was a real person, would you?
Exactly, right. You have to teach them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Wicked. Panos, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. Really, really appreciate you spending some time with us. And yeah, it's been a very interesting conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kenny. It was a pleasure being here.
Nice one. And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you again. We'll put the links to Moveo and to Panos's LinkedIn or what have you if you want to kind of reach out. Moveo.ai, Moveo.ai, correct?
That's correct.
Perfect. Nice one. Really appreciate it. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks now. Bye.
Bye bye.